The dancer beneath the maple sky. By the time I stepped outside, the maple trees were ablaze with color. A warm autumn wind swept past me, carrying the scent of earth and wood, and a single red leaf fluttered down to rest on my shoulder. The world seemed to hold its breath, caught between the fiery leaves and the clear, crisp air. Then I saw her. In the clearing by the trees, she was dancing. Twirl, skip, jump, spin. Her movements were both wild and graceful, like she was weaving her spirit into the wind itself. Her dark eyes sparkled with 1,000 mysteries, and I was drawn to her without knowing why. She didn't notice me watching, or if she did, she didn't let on. The leaves spun around her, catching the light and casting a glow that felt almost magical. I couldn't look away. Then, suddenly, the sky opened up, and rain poured down. The fiery leaves dimmed, and she was drenched. I shook myself from my trance and dashed forward, opening my umbrella over her head. She looked at me then, our gazes locking. Her eyes were filled with an intensity one had never seen before. I felt my cheeks warm, my thoughts jumbling. Not knowing what else to do, I handed her the umbrella, then hurried away, catching the next bus to anywhere. The memory of that afternoon lingered for months. I couldn't shake the thought of her, the way she danced so freely, like nothing in the world could weigh her down. I tried to dismiss it as a dream, but something in my chest ached with a sweet kind of longing. My friends teased me, saying I was love-struck by a mystery girl. But it was more than that. 2 months later, I was sitting by the window at Little Bean's Cafe, watching the world reflected in a puddle outside. A small boat floated there, drifting on the ripples, and a little boy played nearby with a beetle on a string. Lost in the moment, I didn't notice her until she slid into the seat across from me. My heart skipped a beat as I looked up. It was her, my dancer under the maple trees. She smiled, setting down a steaming cup of coffee and placing my red umbrella on the table. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I noticed her hands, strong, expressive, with 2 silver rings and snow-white nails. She noticed my gaze, and for a second, we both laughed. The tension dissolved, and conversation flowed between us as naturally as the river down the mountainside. We talked for hours, losing track of time as the sun set, casting the cafe in a warm glow. Her name was Aria, and talking with her was like finding a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. As we left, she took my hand, guiding me back to the grove where we first met. Without a word, she tied her hair back, pulled on her dance shoes, and spun across the leaves. Swish, twirl, leap, and land. Her movements set the autumn floor alive again, igniting the leaves with a new fire. I watched in awe, then, grinning, joined her. I was clumsy compared to her grace, but her laugh was so infectious I couldn't help myself. Together, we danced in the fading light, and as we spun and twirled, it felt like the whole world was dancing with us. The fiery leaves lifted in the wind, wrapping around us, lifting us higher. I didn't know where we'd go from here, but in that moment, dancing with her under the maple trees, I knew I'd found something I never wanted to lose. As the sky darkened and the stars appeared above us, the world grew quiet. Aria and I finally slowed, breathless, surrounded by leaves scattered like embers around our feet. She looked up at the sky, her expression softened and dreamlike, and for a moment, I felt like I was seeing her in an entirely new light. "Thank you," as she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "For dancing with me. Most people don't. They just don't understand." I could feel a pang of recognition in her words, and without thinking, I reached for her hand. "I think I understand. Or I want to," I said, a bit clumsily, but Aria smiled, and that was all I needed to feel sure. The walk back to town was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt as though we were still caught in the magic of the evening. I could hear the faint sound of water from a stream nearby, blending with the soft whispers of our footsteps on the fallen leaves. As we reached the edge of town, I stopped and turned to her, suddenly reluctant for the night to end. "Do you want to come to my place for tea?" I offered, a little hesitant. I don't want this night to end just yet." Aria's eyes sparkled, and she nodded. "I'd like that." We walked up to my small, cozy apartment, filled with the little trinkets I'd collected over the years, books stacked haphazardly, photos pinned to the walls, and candles that cast a warm, flickering light over the space. I made us both cups of chamomile tea, and we settled into the old, well-worn couch. The sound of the city outside faded as we spoke, sharing stories of our lives, our dreams, and the things we'd both held close but never shared with anyone else. When the conversation grew quiet, Aria looked around my apartment, her gaze finally resting on the umbrella she'd returned to me. She chuckled softly, tracing the edge of it with her fingers. "I never got a chance to thank you for this, as she said, glancing up at me. You could have just walked away that day, but you didn't." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "You looked like you belonged to that place, the trees, the colors. I just wanted to be a part of it, even if it was only for a moment." She leaned back, a soft, contented sigh escaping her lips. "I'm glad it was you," as she murmured. The night drifted on, and as the candles burned lower, our voices grew softer until we were sitting together in comfortable silence. The space between us felt delicate, like a new and fragile thing, but as the dawn began to creep through the curtains, I knew that this connection, whatever it was something I'd hold on to. When she finally left, I watched her go, feeling both a pang of longing and a quiet happiness. In the weeks that followed, Aria and I met almost every day, falling into an easy rhythm. We shared small, ordinary moments, as well as the quiet magic that had first brought us together. Each day with her felt like another chapter in a story I hadn't known I was waiting to live. And as autumn turned to winter, with snow settling gently on the streets and a chill in the air, we kept dancing. Winter arrived, wrapping the town in a quiet, silvery blanket. Aria and I found ourselves savoring the change in the air, the way the sharp chill encouraged us to huddle closer together. Every morning, she'd surprise me with a new place to explore, a small cafe or a tucked-away bookstore. In her presence, the cold didn't seem so bitter. One snowy evening, we decided to take a walk through the park, bundled in scarves and thick coats. The sky was an inky blue, and the only sounds were our crunching footsteps and the faint echo of distant laughter from holiday shoppers. Snowflakes drifted gently, sticking to Aria's dark curls, which peeked out from under her knitted hat. She looked so peaceful, her face tilted up to catch the flakes. We strolled deeper into the park, eventually reaching a small, frozen lake surrounded by skeletal trees. Aria stopped, took a deep breath, and grinned. "Come on," she said, extending a gloved hand to me. "Onto the ice?" I laughed nervously. I haven't skated in years. She squeezed my hand. "We won't skate. We'll just slide." Her eyes sparkled mischievously. "Trust me?" I nodded, letting her lead me carefully onto the lake's frozen surface. We shuffled a few steps, laughing at our clumsy movements. Aria was fearless, twirling and sliding gracefully while I tried to keep my balance. After a few minutes, I began to find my footing, and soon we were both gliding across the ice, moving with increasing ease and laughter. Then, as if caught by a whim, she stopped in the center of the lake and turned to face me. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes held that familiar, almost magical look. She reached out, gently holding both my hands in hers. As she began softly, At that day in the park, I had actually been feeling lost, in a way. I didn't think anyone would notice me, let alone join me under the trees. And yet, there you were, with that red umbrella and that look in your eyes. She smiled. You made me feel seen. A warmth filled my chest, chasing away the winter chill. I felt the same way, I replied. You made me feel like I was part of something special. Aria pulled me a little closer, and we stood there in silence, letting the snow drift around us, filling in all the spaces between words. There, in the heart of winter, with the world hushed and blanketed in snow, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known before. The days that followed were filled with simple joys, evenings spent curled up by the fire, sharing old stories and laughing over mugs of hot chocolate, mornings when we'd brave the frosty air to wander the snowy streets, discovering new corners of the city together. The world felt slower, more deliberate, and the two of us drifted through it as if we had all the time in the world. One night, as we were warming up after a day in the snow, Aria pulled out a small notebook, its cover worn and faded. She hesitated, then handed it to me. I started this the day we met, she said, a little shyly. Just small things, thoughts, sketches, moments I wanted to remember. I opened the notebook, flipping through its pages. There were little drawings of red umbrellas, sketches of leaves, and brief notes about the days we'd spent together. Some pages were filled with delicate doodles of stars, while others held scribbled lines of poetry. I felt a lump in my throat as I took it all in, realizing how much these moments had meant to her, too. This is beautiful, Aria, I whispered, looking up at her. Thank you for sharing it with me. She looked down, her cheeks pink. You're the reason it exists. We spent the rest of the night sitting close, the notebook open between us as we laughed and reminisced over each page. In the quiet glow of the firelight, I realized just how deeply Aria had become a part of my life, a part one could no longer imagine being without. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and as the snow began to melt, so did the invisible walls I'd once kept around my heart. What had started as a single dance on a crisp autumn day had become a journey, one that I knew I wanted to continue with Aria, wherever it might lead us.